Hi, this is Brendan Davis from Bedrock Games, and this is the first in a series of video blogs that I'm hoping to do. Basically, I just want to start supplementing our regular Bedrock blog, maybe even replace it with video posts eventually. It's just an easier and more efficient use of my time because I've been needing to do a lot more work on the design end, and sometimes doing all the writing for the blog is stuff that I like to do, but I just don't have the time when I'm working on a project. So today I want to talk about something that we've mentioned a lot on the blog, which is dungeons in a wuxia setting. Now, one of the things that I think is interesting about this topic is a lot of people, when I talk to them about wuxia campaigns, and I try to, whether I'm recruiting players or talking to GMs that are considering or interested in running wuxia, a lot of people seem resistant to the idea of doing dungeons in that environment. And I think the reason is they just don't associate it with the genre. I suspect it's because it's not an essential feature of the genre, so people just assume if it's not an essential feature, with wuxia you have to, you can't do it. You can't do something that isn't clearly unique to wuxia. But my feeling is, if you go back and you watch, anything from Dragon Swamp to Detective D and the Mystery of the Phantom Flame to Return of Condor Heroes, there are dungeons all the time in both the movies and the series and in the books. And to the point that I think dungeons are almost just as prevalent in wuxia as they are in some medieval fantasy. The only real difference is sometimes they serve more as set pieces for combat, and the context is usually different. So in a fantasy campaign, you're usually going to go into the dungeon. The stereotype would be for a dragon horde or something of that nature. And in a wuxia setting, it's more likely to be a martial arts manual or something along those lines. So and that's really just a minor detail. I think that in the end, they generally aren't that different. It's not that difficult to run a dungeon in a wuxia setting, and it's not that difficult to fit it to a wuxia setting. I've found that with the conceit of the martial arts manual, that pretty much explains, number one, why they'd be there half the time, but number two, why players would go and explore them. I think that's often the piece that gets people in a wuxia campaign, because in wuxia, characters are often these martial heroes who are very honorable, and they're not necessarily going to be going and doing dungeon delves for riches. I mean, you can have characters like that, but that's not what leaps to mind. But even a great martial hero is going to have to, improve his kung fu abilities, and one way to do that is find, ancient manuals that have secret techniques, and you put them at the bottom of a temple somewhere, and you have a dungeon. So I think that it's just a good fit, and I can understand why people might be reluctant to use them in a wuxia campaign. My advice would be just try it, and I think you'll find that it actually fits quite well. When I was working on Ogregate, one of the things that I did was I went back and I rewatched a lot of the wuxia movies that I really liked, and in particular, I was mainly looking for martial arts techniques because I had to emulate them in the rule book. But I also wanted to look at other elements of the genre, like things that might appear in a game that I might not necessarily think of in wuxia just because I haven't noticed it. And I suspected that dungeons might be one of those things. So I kept an eye out for anything that struck me as a dungeony. In fact, if you go back and you look at some of the wuxia reviews that I've been doing on the blog for over the past several years, some of them will have at the end a section that talks about GMing the movie, like sort of how you might use this for a game. And I usually call out anything that seems dungeony at all. So so even a film like, say, Swordsman 2, or Bride with White Hair. There are locations in there. Now they're not typical dungeons, but there's like a small prison sequence in the Swordsman 2 film. And as a GM, when I see that, I immediately started thinking of how to turn that into a little dungeon. And in fact, I think in my own campaign, I combined the villain's fort from Lady Hermit with the prison in Swordsman 2, and kind of made this complex that was a combination of the two things. So if you go in the book and you look at Red Claw's Pagoda, it's going to basically, that's kind of where those ideas came from. So yeah, I think it's really not that tough. I think another issue that sometimes comes up with dungeons and wuxia, and just wuxia in general, is historical accuracy. It's, if you're going to run a wuxia setting and you've never done anything that's historical Chinese or ancient Chinese, it's going to be a little bit harder for you. But again, I don't think it's that much harder than medieval fantasy. When I first started running medieval fantasy games, I would all the time use, just anachronism after anachronism, and my games didn't look anything like historical Europe. And it wasn't until I got older and went to college and studied history and took a few medieval courses that my medieval setting material started to really resemble something like out of the Middle Ages. But I think that sort of thing comes with time, that comes with having an interest in it, and it doesn't have to be that way right off the bat. Now, you could do a Wuxia campaign that's set in historical China, and your dungeons would need to reflect the realities of the architecture from the time and all that. But you also could just do an analog that's a rough approximation of historical China, and because it's your own unique setting, you can do whatever you want. And if you look at a lot of the wuxia series and wuxia movies that have been coming out lately, you'll see that there's a lot of cross-fertilization between movies from Europe and the States and Chinese films. And so and that's been going on for ages. Even the early wuxia movies borrowed a lot from Japanese cinema. So it's not like, I think sometimes we get locked into this quest for purity and authenticity, especially when it's something like wuxia, something outside. If you're an American, that's really far outside of stuff that we might have grown up with. So I don't know. I don't think that it's helpful to lock yourself in that too much. I mean, I love history. I love doing research. I think it's really important to know what the source material is, but at the same time, you don't want to strangle it. You don't want to make it feel lifeless. And so one of the things that I think sometimes kills a lot of people's interest in wuxia campaigns is GMs stifle it too much because they're really striving for a level of purity that maybe the players aren't as interested in, or that sucks a little bit of the creativity out of it. I know in my own case, I've run a number of wuxia campaigns and Oriental adventure campaigns back with the D20 material, and really they didn't start working for me until I opened up a bit and allowed myself to be more creative. And I think that really begins with stuff like dungeons. Now, you don't have, I mean, not every DM is a dungeon GM, I get that, but if you normally use dungeons in your campaigns, then I think you shouldn't hesitate to use them in a wuxia campaign. I mean, the basic thing that I've learned is anything that you use in your normal campaigns, any of your normal tools that you're accustomed to using, will usually work fine in wuxia. As long as you watch wuxia, as long as you have an interest in it, and you do what research you feel you need to do in between, it'll be fine. The big thing is to not run a campaign just having seen a single wuxia movie or something like that. That's where I think you'll run into trouble. But you don't need to be an expert on Imperial China to run a campaign. It certainly would help. I mean, no doubt. But there's no reason why you can't have a little bit of fun with it. And I think if you go and you watch a lot of these shows and these movies, they're using the history as a canvas. They're using it as a backdrop to do all kinds of things. There's historical accuracy there, but there's also a lot of invention. And if you don't give yourself room for the invention, for the fun, then again it can feel really dry, and it can suck the life out. And again, in my own campaigns, it's always when I take that step back and I say, okay, I want to have fun with this, that things really start to work. And with dungeons especially, that's just you just need to have that level of comfort and ease, I think, for things to work. So, I'll probably do some more video blogs on this subject. I really do want to talk about dungeons in Wuxia more, because there's a lot of specific things that we can get into, like how much supernatural elements to bring in, and making the dungeons feel interesting and varied yet believable, and that can sometimes be a challenge in a Wuxia setting, especially since the dials for the supernatural levels are often set to such different levels from one campaign to the next. So anyways, I will hopefully have another one of these up in the next few days. I am presently working on getting Wandering Heroes of Ogregate out the door, so it's in layout, and I hope to have everything done soon. And once that's done, then I think you'll start seeing a lot more blog entries, and hopefully more of these video blogs. All right, bye.